digital currencies that could become more widely adopted are, first, retail central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Second, wholesale CBDCs, which financial institutions can use for large value. And third, stablecoins, which are issued by private sector players, adopted by the client network of such issuers. Fundamentally, the retail central bank digital currencies can strengthen interconnections within and between sovereign economies, benefiting both the private and public sector. Domestically, it can help drive a cashless economy and make monetary policy transmission more efficient. One of the key advantages of CBDCs is to support faster and faster cross-border payments. In turn, this may facilitate cheaper, more efficient cross-border trade. When we look at digital evolution and financial innovation, Asia, particularly so in China, has been at the forefront from the development to the implementation stages. In the retail space, for instance, the People's Bank of China, eCNY, the digital renminbi initiative, holds great promise. The scale of the pilot experimentations should yield good data and insights into how retail CBDCs might affect the economy in practice. In the whole CBDC space, the Central Bank of the UAE has joined the People's Bank of China, the Hong Kong Monetary and the Bank of Thailand in a project known as the Multiple CBDC Bridge Project to explore the use of blockchain technology to support real-time cross-border multi-currency payments. I look forward to the outcome of this initiative and its impact on cross-border fund transfers, international trade settlement, and capital market transactions in the near future. Stablecoins, as another digital currency, can also play a part in bringing the unbanked into the financial system and widen financial inclusion. Though Facebook's DM project is still in its early stages, once ready, it could offer a bridge for jurisdictions where central banks are still exploring CBDCs. However, regulators would likely ask for greater transparency and more robust governance arrangements from stablecoin issuers before such digital currency can be used in their jurisdiction. The possible risks posed by stablecoins must not be allowed to compromise the integrity of the financial system, nor pose potential to the ecosystems. We expect that digital currencies will increasingly so that they can continue to integrate into the global financial system. In the medium term, we anticipate that further safeguards beyond the current emphasis on tighter AML/CFT supervision will be applied to digital currencies. In general, the offering of digital securities bears the same investor risks as any other type of security issuance. For the Middle East region, financial innovation has become one of the key enablers for economic diversification and a solution for growth. This is particularly relevant of the Middle East and North Africa regions' demographies. The MENA region is home to 450 million people. Of that total, about half of the population is younger than 25 years old. Youthful populations of such size presents an attractive and fast-growing market of early technology adopters. At the same time, almost half of this population have limited or no access to financial services. This creates a huge opportunity to provide the markets with more financial and options, including digital banking and fintech. It is a big opportunity to offer digital banking solutions to markets where physical banks are scarce or hard to reach.
That was a great introduction to some of the topics we're going to be discussing today. And let me just start by introducing our fantastic panel here and online as well. I'll first start with Zhou Xiaotun, the Vice Chairman of the Boao Forum for Asia and a former Governor of the People's Bank. Hannah Chiu, the China CEO for PayPal. And moving online, we have Augustin Carstens, General Manager of the Bank for International Settlement. We have Deputy Governor Li Bo of the People's Bank of China, Ms. Vichira Arondi, Assistant Governor of the Bank of Thailand, Javier Perez Tasso, Chief Executive of SWIFT. Thank you for joining us online. Just a show of hands from the audience, who heard or is familiar with the term central bank currency or CBDC? Okay. Panel, we got a lot of work to do today. Let me start with you. It was under your time at the People's Bank of China that the digital renminbi project begun. Now the conversation moved on to the fact that maybe the digital yuan is a way for China to internationalize use of the renminbi to potentially displace the dollar. Firstly, can you give us your thinking behind launching the digital renminbi project? And secondly, your thoughts on what that means for the yuan's standing in the international market.
好，这个很高兴参加这个开会。同时呢，我也要说呢，这个3年以前呢，我已经离开了这个人民银行啊，但是我对还是有关心的，所以呢，我还是作为一个观察者来讲这些事儿啊，也不见得说的对，反正那个 PBOC 有这个李波在，是吧？那么我们说，你刚才说到呢，这个最初始的考虑是什么？我觉得最初始的考虑呢，是可以发展，是吧？特别是这个互联网提供终端手机，可以更方便的这个给大众提支付。中国呢又是一个非常大的零售市场，又有14亿的人，那么大家呢都希望这方面呢，这个可以走向更方便、更有效、成本更低的这个支付体系，就从这个思路开始走。最开始的时候没想过是不是需要做批发系统啊，或者是做人民币国际化呀，没有太多的这么。就是从零售系统开始，从零售系统开始呢，可以这儿怎么理解这个数字货币呢？我们说呢，这个过去人们这个要付钱的话呢，就是要从钱包里拿出来，但这个钱包呢，随着数字化呢，就变成数字钱包。那么数字钱包呢，可能就是在这个网络终端上。具体来讲呢，很多人就是在手机上使用。手机作为一个数字终端，里头有个数字钱包，那么数字钱包呢就可以做支付。那么支付的时候，大家就说，那你从那个数字钱包里拿出来的是什么？是纸币呢，还是硬币呢？其实既不是纸币，也不是硬币。那么我们叫它啥？就是数字货币。所以我理解呢，数字最早的这个起始点，其实从这儿起来的那么那么做的呢，后面有一大堆的这个技术技术上的讨论。但是我们说呢，只要从数字钱就是数字货币，你就不要太认真的去区分它是以账户为基础的，还是这个 token base 的，我们说是 token 为基础的。特别在乎呢，它后面的这个支付清算系统，因为老百姓不背后的这个系统是怎么样也不用呢去说呢，它是一个去中心化的还是有中心化的，是吧？这个呢，当然呢，你可能需要知道一条，就是说你不能够利用这个系统呢去洗钱、去逃税、去搞毒品武器交易在中国呢还不可以你去做赌博就这个呢我觉得就是这个数字人民币的起始点。 我觉得呢，做好这个零售，把零售系统效率提高呢，是所有开展其他业务的一个基础。这个做好了以后呢，应该呢，你说比如说这个批发系统啊，刚才咱们这个 ADGM 的这个叫 President 吧，是吧？他所说很多方面呢，就有了操作的这个可能性。同时呢，这个这个各种发展呢是不一样的，就是市场需求是不一样的。我想最大的需求呢还是在这个零售系统。对中国来讲，还是主要是国内。未来来对于比如说这个跨境支付啊，不管是用是哪一种货币，跨境也会带来方便。但是呢，初始的动机并不是想要去这个跨境。跨境还有很多复杂的问题，比如说各央行的这个主权货币的问题，比如说很多国家央行呢，它是防止本国这个叫外币化，比如美元化，是吧？它也不一定希望这个人民币在那儿就起主导作用，是吧？这个比如说它有这个反洗钱、反恐融资的要求，它希望呢这个货币政策有它自己的独立性，而不要说弄完了以后，它货币政策这个宏观调控它自己独立性都没有了，所以它会涉及到很多复杂的问题。这个呢，我们在未来的这个还可以逐步去解决。但是我觉得呢，就是做好这个基础工作，就是先从像中国从这个14亿人口这么大的零售系统呢，做好这个零售系统的这个升级换代。这个升级换代呢，我就很喜欢你们这个名字叫数字支付，是吧？叫 digital payment。因为过去呢，这个银行老愿说 electronic payment 是这个电子，其实呢老早。那么你说这个数字的这个货币，或者是 CBDC， 与其说数字货币 CBDC 呢，其实你说呢，它在想的用途 ，digital payment 就是数字支付，所以我觉得这个名字起得很好。我先说到这儿。
Thank you, Governor Joe. To Mr. Carstens, it seems like every major central bank right now talking about central bank digital currencies. Now, and how much has this been driven by the rise of Bitcoin, but also, other private stable as well?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be in this Boao Forum, and of course to always share the panel with Shoshuan and Willow, Vivo, and other central bank colleagues, and Javier and everybody. Well, of course, CBDC is a response of central banks to this trend that has been observed for quite some time of having more digital payments, having more efficient payments, and the reflection has been if there are private alternatives, why not to provide a CBDC? As a matter of fact, I think it's important to notice that central banks have been at the forefront of digital payments. Central banks for quite some time have been electronic payments, as the way Shushan mentioned. But now, in most places in the world, there are instant payments through fast payment systems, many of them run by the central bank or if not sponsored by the central banks, that allow immediate settlement and they are quite secure. So it doesn't mean that the central banks have not been innovating and had not been making an important contribution. All the private alternatives that are there, in particular in terms of fast payments, at some point involve central bank money in the form of wholesale digital currencies. So the real question is why this focus on retail? As Shoshuan said, the main attention of CBDC among people recently has been focusing more on the possibility of having a retail CBDC. So far, there has been some progress, quite substantial, and needless to say, PBOC has been a leader and we all have learned a lot of what has been done. Now, the real reason is that central bank money, either in the form of digital or in form of cash, has very particular attributes that other forms of money do not have. What is key is that they don't have credit risk. They provide for final payments. They are very efficient, and they are they don't imply a high cost. I mean, as a matter of fact, right now the superior type of money is central bank money in any form. Now, once that is recognized, I think what many people in society is demanding is to have the possibility of having central bank money in digital forms, in retail forms. And I think that's the key issue, that's the real demand of people, and that's what the central banks need to respond to. Now, as Shoshan mentioned, the way of going forward is complex because CBDC needs at the same time have many characteristics. It has to be secure, it has to be efficient, it has to be usable by any member of society, and pretty much all central banks do not have the facility to cater individual users. Therefore, we will have to design a system where we will continue depending on commercial banks and other payment service providers. It's a system where there cannot be mistakes. No? It has to be completely solid, and that raises the bar very high. So we're very excited in the central banking community to embrace this challenge. What we want to do is precisely that, to provide a payment opportunity that has the full backing of the central bank with unique characteristics that the central bank can bring to the table, and at the same time join forces with the private sector to do a private-public partnership, a two-tier system, and satisfy the demands of society in the most efficient way. I'll stop here.
Some of those points you raised were great, and we'll dig into those through the course of this discussion. I just want to move on to Deputy Governor Lee for a moment. Now, the PBOC has run a number of pilots with the digital renminbi across the country. There's more to come at this stage. I just have two questions. Firstly, what are some of the things you've learned from these pilots in terms of the digital renminbi? And the second question is something I'm sure everyone in this room would love to know. Moving forward, how do you plan to roll this out nationwide? What are the steps and what is the timeline?
Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Sorry, I apologize. Thanks for the questions. I will take your questions one by one. The first question is on what we have learned so far on the pilot projects of eCNY. I think we have learned quite a lot. One thing we have learned is that a two-tier system does work in the digital world, very similar to the physical cash. We have a two-tier, and it shows that the two-tier system is compatible with the existing monetary and banking system, and minimize the risk of financial disintermediation. I think the second thing that we have learned is that we can achieve controllable anonymity or managed anonymity using the digital technology. Our multi-layer wallet system basically allows for anonymity for small value transactions. and also for large volume transactions, central bank can trace. That we think is a desirable feature of the digital currency or CBDC. The third thing that we learned is that, as Governor Zhou just mentioned, it is possible to try hybrid system. So our system, our eCNY, is compatible with account-based, quasi-account-based, and token-based model. And our second-tier authorized operators could explore different combinations of technical paths. So we have quite an open system. So far our experiments have been going well. And in terms of your second question, moving forward, we don't have a timeline yet, but we know what we need to do. There are several things we need to do before we can roll out the eCNY nationally. One thing we need to do is to continue to experiment and to increase the scope of the pilot projects. Another thing we need to do is to strengthen our eCNY ecosystem, including technology infrastructure. In addition, we need to continue to improve the safety and reliability of our system. And finally, we need to build a proper legal and regulatory environment for eCNY. I will stop here for now.
And Deputy Governor Lee, just quickly elaborate on the point about extending the scope of the pilot projects. Does that mean sort of larger lotteries? Could you just slightly elaborate on that point?
Well, we are considering more scenarios and more cities for the experiment. For example, our upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics, we will try to make eCNY available not only to domestic users, but also to international athletes and visitors. So we are going to continue to do that, to include more scenarios and more cities into our pilot projects, and in this process to strengthen our ecosystem.
Thank you. Assistant Governor RMD, I just want to come to you to talk about Thailand for a moment and the Bank of Thailand working on your own CBDC. You're now preparing for a retail CBDC. Could you give us some insight into what that looks like right now and your plans going forward, and if we can expect a mass rollout of this anytime soon?
Thank you, Arjun. First of all, let me thank you, and then it's my pleasure to be invited here for this great forum. For case of Thailand, as you have already mentioned, we start from wholesale CBDC first. Why wholesale at first? We started in the year 2018. Why we started the wholesale? Because maybe it's can controllable, because we try to implement replicate the RTGS or the payment system. And then we know that the important thing about doing this CBDC, and then the pain point is about the cross-border. That's why we try to do the cross-border payment also. And then in the wholesale CBDC that we has experiment, we pair with HKMA, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, to do the cross-border payment. We set up a corridor so that each central bank can join in that corridor and then do the payment, cross-border payment between the two exchange rates. And now we are in the phase that the UAE and the PBOC and also the BIS will join us. That we call the multiple CBDC bridge project. This project will try to explore the fact whether to facilitate the real-time cross-border foreign exchange payment versus payment transaction in multi-jurisdiction context, and hopefully that this will work well, and then it can be the standard for other central bank maybe to join, because I think that the cross-border, as Governor Zhou has mentioned, that cross-border payment is quite important, especially for emerging markets. For example, in the case of Thailand, we are a small open economy and with a large export sector. So cross-border payment help us play an important role for us to connect with other trading partners. So this is quite important to us. But as Governor has mentioned already that the cross-border payment is quite complicated. It has some implication on the FX policy. It has some implication on the capital flow management policy. And so this is kind of issue that we have to tackle. And then that's why we set up the corridor and then try to mitigate the implication or the impact of this kind of try to mitigate the concern or the impact that will happen with the open cross-border CBDC. And you has already mentioned about our new project. This year we will start doing also the retail CBDC. What our plan is, we start from the wholesale, and then during the time we do the wholesale, we do the cross-border wholesale. We do the wholesale, partly wholesale and retail with the corporate sector. Want to understand how the corporate sector needs to understand the transaction or the activity need that CBDC can serve the corporate sector. And for this year, we try to launch the retail CBDC. Similar to other central banks countries, when talking about retail CBDC, we are talking about the digital banknote. Why digital banknotes? Because at least it's similar. It has some characteristic similar to cash. So that is one thing. And what we plan to do is similar to other central bank has explored. We try to do two-tier system also. Why two-tier system? Because when we are talking about retail CBDC, there are three concerns. There are three big concerns that at first when we start to doing this, three big concerns is about the monetary policy transmission. And then the other one is about financial stability. And the third one is about financial landscape. We also think that the role of financial intermediary is still quite an important in supporting economic activities because banks, they do the function of resource allocation. Banks help doing some asymmetric information in the system in allocation of the resource and allocation the credit. So this is still the important roles of intermediary. That's why we think that two-tier system will be better and then better than the one-tier system that the questions has mentioned. So in the design that we plan to do, we will have a two-tier system, and so that will mitigate the concern about the role of intermediaries and the role of the financial system. And the other one, as I mentioned, it's about digital banknotes, so no interest bearing, and maybe we can have some limitation of the holding. So hopefully that will mitigate some kind of the concern of stability, financial stability, and the concern of monetary policy implication. I think I'll stop there, and hopefully that maybe next year we will have some pilot project also. Thank you.
That's great, Assistant Governor. Thank you. We'll dig into some of those issues you brought up as well. But one of the big themes of the discussion so far has been about cross-border. And Hannah, I'll come to you on that. The pandemic has really sort of sped up, as we mentioned, some of those trends around digitalization, e-commerce, and digital payments as well. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, what are some of the big trends you've seen through this pandemic when it comes to cross-border? And secondly, PayPal's recently set up in China. You've got control of the payment platform. What are PayPal's plans in China?
Thank you, Arjun. And it's my honor to be attend this forum together with Governor Zhou, Governor Li, and other honorable guests. I will switch to Mandarin because most of the audience today is Chinese. 后面我就开始用中文了。非常荣幸
I'll speak English. It's my great honor to be here for this panel discussion. Now, the questions raised by the moderator, what are kinds of, what trends in the cross-border payment, which is a key area for PayPal. Basically, we help the sellers to sell abroad and also to collect the payment from abroad for the sellers. Now, more and more vendors are using digital payment. Of course, they are also using traditional payment. During the pandemic, the increase of use of payment is actually 4 times of that of a non-adoption of digital payment. So 3 times growth in terms of the adoption of digital payment. We see this great increase based on our own payment statistics, much faster than the non-adoption of digital payment. Basically, digital payment helped these vendors in their business growth. Now, in terms of trade, during the pandemic, there were different stages. Decline in the beginning, but fast recovery in the later stages. The reopening of the economy in China outpaced the rest of the world. Chinese vendors were very quick in remobilizing their production operations and also distribution to the rest of the world. CBDC also has a type of account-based. Digital payment is already using this account-based payment or approach. So that was the first question. Now, second, PayPal has a great global presence, has just entered the Chinese market. So we have to look at our China strategy. In the near future, we will continue to accelerate our digital payment business in China to help the Chinese corporates or vendors in selling their products to the rest of the world, and in turn, helping the Chinese consumers in buying products from the rest of the world.
We also set up a domestic wallet that may even compete with the likes of Alipay or WeChat Pay.
这个问题啊，其实也有很多人问过我。我相信大家呢，这个有很多的。
Now, I've been asked the same question many times. There is a misconception because we're in the payment business. So naturally, some would believe we're in competition with the Tencent or Alipay. The reality is, however, PayPal is not in direct competition with these local payment institutions. We are focusing on cross-border payments. That's where our value is. Cross-border. 377 million personal users and over 20 million vendor users. A huge customer network for us. And we're playing a role of bridge in selling the Chinese products to the rest of the world and also getting the good vendors, introducing the overseas vendors into China. So there's no direct competition between PayPal and Tencent or Alipay. There is actually potential for us to work with each other. We are already working closely with some of the payment institutions.
Just talk to me about some of the big trends you've seen through this pandemic when it comes to cross-border as well. And again, just in terms of your China business, recently set up a joint venture with the PBOC. Can you just explain a bit about the scope of that and whether this at all fits into what the PBOC is doing with the digital renminbi? Hi, Javier. Don't know if you can hear us. You meant to unmute your mic. Great, great.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, hello, everybody. And I'm very pleased to be here with all of you today. It's great to have be in company with such panelists like Vice Chairman Zhu, Deputy Governor Lee, Agustin, of course, and fellow distinguished panelists. So in terms of the discussion, yeah, I'm happy to talk about the JV or more general, and then of course get into the very interesting discussion that and thoughts that have been put on the table. So in terms of the JV, very quickly, that was set up to comply with regulations in China. It's SWIFT is an international company that provides connectivity to in excess of 11,000 players, 11,000 institutions across more than 200 countries. And of course, China is a massively important one. Its scope is very limited. It's primarily about connectivity, but it is not related to CBDCs. So that's an important element to put forward. Actually, the PBOC recently released a circular that provides more information on the regulatory requirements and the role of the JV. So I can elaborate on that, but and I can definitely talk, and I would like to share our perspectives on CBDC, but just to put it in context about the positioning of the JV. So more generally, maybe Arjun,
Javier, I just wanted to get your thoughts firstly on just some of the big trends you've seen when it comes to cross-border payments through the pandemic. How you see it evolving moving forward.
Yeah. So indeed, I mean, it's been great to hear some of the thoughts, of course, by the panelists. I think it's maybe in terms of context. Well, as I said, SWIFT present globally and integrating across many different business lines: trade finance, securities, FX, and of course payments. I think in terms of trends, it's important to see that I think there's been the payments industry and the cross-border payments industry is in massive flux with new entrants in different levels in the front-end space, customer channels, with on the back of pro-competition regulations sometimes, like in Europe with PSD2, open banking in general, the entrance of PSPs as a whole, but also, of course, the giants like the platform Tencent and Alipay, as mentioned earlier on, PayPal, of course, playing a big role in there. But not only in the front end, also in the back end, in the infrastructure level, there's been a lot of innovation happening. I'll talk later a little bit more on CBDCs, but definitely around both domestic and cross-border. At the end is providing the end-to-end glue of these systems. And you see new technologies coming to the fore. You see the card networks, the Visa, MasterCard, that are also now expanding into wire transfers. And of course, at SWIFT, over the past 5 years, we've put a major focus on enhancing cross-border payments and the service that banks can offer to their end customers, consumers, and corporate clients, by bringing correspondent banking and cross-border payments yet to the next level with GPI, which has been a massive evolution in that space. Essentially, this is making payments today more efficient in terms of cost, speed, and transparency, allowing banks to track all transactions, all payments across the SWIFT ecosystem, and also providing us with significant insights. Insights such as, for example, that we know that today, I think it's good to remind ourselves that today, 42% of all international payments are delivered to the beneficiary within 5 minutes. More than half are delivered within 30 minutes, and almost 100% of all payments delivered within 24 hours. And this is not just to the recipient bank, but it's to the end beneficiary customer. So this is a significant evolution over the past 5 years. SWIFT and the industry together. in fact, and maybe I refer to the great work done by the FSB and CPMI, of course, led by Agustin, and we are jointly addressing with the industry many of the building blocks that came out of this very good work and in the three-stage process and resulting papers that aim at enhancing cross-border payments, as Agustin said, making them more transparent, efficient, and inclusive. So in that sense, the building blocks from the CPMI work are directed at many of the issues that we see in live situations today. Particularly, maybe I'll mention a few of them. Operating hours, especially as you go east against the sun, the receiving country is closed, then payments, of course, get held up. Another important one is that legacy banking system. Although we are seeing progress in the move from batch processing to real-time operations, are still an area of concern. Local currency controls in the receiving country, obviously, they are a matter of economic policy, but they, the way they are being implemented is a major factor in slowing international payments. And there are, of course, different data requirements between jurisdictions and some of the frictions around financial crime compliance practices across jurisdictions. So what we see is, and I think it's important, is of course, I think it's more than roughly 35% of international payments have a domestic market infrastructure leg into RTGSs, ACHs, or real-time payment systems. So the interoperability and the cooperation between all of these market infrastructures is crucial. So the key purpose is that regardless of the technology, standard, or protocol that are being used domestically, there needs to be a global interoperability providing liquidity to the system. And that interoperability with banks playing a front and center role with the evolution of correspondent banking. And maybe to end in terms of big trends, maybe I'll mention just a couple of words about how we see it at SWIFT as well, and with the banking industry, the evolution in the next couple of years. So what we've seen great progress and momentum so far. Our new strategy that we just launched is about building on that to achieve instant and frictionless end-to-end transactions from any account to any account in the world, making international payments essentially as seamless as domestic one. And we're talking about, in practice, 4 billion accounts globally interconnected. That is going to bring true end-to-end transaction management approach to international payments. And that is part of the delivery that we're doing with many of you in the banking industry to deliver a strategic roadmap with our global community that will span SWIFT capabilities beyond financial messaging to provide comprehensive transaction management services using ISO 20022 standards so that we can enable pre-validation of possession data, fraud detection, data analytics, transaction tracking, digital identity, and exception case management. So all of that, plus the use of traditional technologies such as APIs, AI, machine learning, that will provide the intelligence to interpret data and reach and define. So maybe I'll pause there.
Thanks, Javier.
Many more thoughts to be taken into account, particularly on the topic of CBDCs that I'll cover later.
That's great. Thank you so much. Governor Joe and Mr. Carstens, I want to address you both. And Governor Joe, if you could go first. I want to talk about, Javier then mentioned interoperability, and we've been talking a lot about cross-border and how different central banks will work together. But there seems to be a lot of challenges, that remain as we move towards a world where central bank digital currencies go global and work together. One of those is interoperability. We're also in a world where there's increasing tensions between countries and there's increasing silos with things like technology and data. As you look at the world and we move forward with CBDCs, what do you see some of the challenges in terms of making CBDCs global? And how do we overcome those?
Well, in terms of interoperability, it is far more complicated than we might imagine it to be. For example, within a country, if you can make easy use of e-wallet, e-payment, or even an electronic currency, why it's going to be so difficult to do it in a cross-border way, in the same secure, efficient, and effective fashion? Why? Why not? Well, you've got to take a careful look at our world being country-based and the national central bank and the national monetary policy-based system in today's world. That's why we're having exchange rates. And when you do it cross-border, you have to convert, have to use the other's exchange rate. Well, when Libra was started, nowadays DIM, DM, they would say, the existing currencies are not so stable. Why don't we all use US dollar? But that's not that simple. Every country has its own imperatives for
more thoughts to be taken into account, particularly on the topic of CBDCs that I'll cover later.
That's great. Thank you so much. Governor Zhou and Mr. Carstens, I want to address you both. And Governor Zhou, if you could go first. I want to talk about, Javier there mentioned interoperability, and we've been talking a lot about cross-border and how different central banks will work together. But there seems to be a lot of challenges, that remain as we move towards a world where central bank digital currencies go global and work together. One of those is interoperability. We're also in a world where there's increasing tensions between countries and there's increasing silos with things like technology and data. As you look at the world and we move forward with CBDCs, what do you see some of the challenges in terms of making CBDCs global? How do we overcome those?
这个互操作性啊，可能是一个说实在的，比人们一般想象中更复杂的问题。 大家都觉得呢，你比如说，你如果在一个国内可以很方便的使用这个数字钱包啊，或者说是数字支付、数字货币以后，为什么跨境不可以这个同样的那么方便，同时也高效率也安全呢？那么实际上呢，这里头呢，你要仔细看一下这个。我们这个全球里头是以国家为基础，以国家的央行和国家的这个货币制度为基础的这样一个体制，那么呢所以呢才有汇率有汇率的，所以你跨境地使用的时候，你要用人家的那个汇率，那么呢这个最开始像 Libra 啊，或者是现在 BIM 呢，他就可能想象。嗨，你们那个货币也不怎么太稳定，不怎么太好用，干脆就用这个国际货币，或者干脆就用美元就算了。这个事儿呢，实际上呢就不那么简单。因为每个国家呢，它有自己的宏观调控的情况，它需要有它自己的货币主权。有的国家呢，这个它那个汇率呢，这个制度上跟这个别的国家不一样。有的国家还有一定程度的外汇管制，像刚才这个塔索先生也提到了，就每国家自己的东西，你不是那么轻易就可以把这些东西都取消掉的，因此呢，这个跨境的时候呢，这个你说如果就用一个国际货币或者用美元，那么为什么世界上这么多很多新兴市场和发展中国家都在讨论呢？他们不希望这个本国美元化。如果都用美元的话呢，他也会提出一些要求。比如说，他说，那你美联储，第一条呢，你在制定货币政策的时候，能不能考虑全球利益，包括我的利益？但美联储呢都是明确说的，我美联储制定货币政策只考虑美国自身的利益，是吧？这是他明确的语言。再有一个呢，就是说你全球出现不稳定了，是吧？这个有危机了，有不稳定了，那么这不稳定谁去解决呢？是吧？2008年这个全球由次贷危机转为全球金融危机的时候，有很多国家流动性都有问题。中国出口到巴西的有好多货物停了港口上，这个那时候没有钱，拿不出钱去支付，就停在那儿了，钱也收不到，那么它有流动性问题，所以呢，大家就说呢，你如果是要美元化的话，那你美联储是不是？能够这个保证给大家提供这个美元的流动性呢？那么实际上呢，大家也看到呢，08年底09年初呢，是美联储呢和欧央行、英格兰银行、瑞士和日本，好像我要没记错的话，有了货币互换，其他的国家他们不管，是吧？因此有好多国家呢跑过来跟中国说，跟你们做一个货币互换，咱们两国的贸易如果流动性有问题呀。或者投资上有问题，可以用货币互换解决。所以呢，也就是说，我举这个例子说明呢，就是说，各个国家还有各个国家的需求。现在呢，我们可以做长远的设想，说未来全球这个货币可能会有像一体化呀
currency integration in the world,
which means basically. That they can talk among each other, the different systems. Then there are others where there would be some interlinkages, and that is a closer integration, a closer system where there would be interfaces where would be shared, and therefore the linkage of the systems would be seamless. And then there is the most aggressive form of interoperability is to have some form of an integrated system, which would mean you could have different domestic CBDCs, but they could all coexist in an integrated framework. This would be the most ambitious version, and probably is the most unlikely. But you can see with this commentary that a lot is going on into the interoperability. It would be perfectly compatible with having as key objective as a central bank to have a domestic CBDC, but to facilitate international transactions with them. And again, this is a unique moment in time where all the different aspects that have made cross-border payments so difficult to be addressed in a synchronous way, and so that we end up with a really excellent system. So I am very, very optimistic that either through making systems compatible or interlinked, we will get where we want in a quite efficient way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carstens. Deputy Governor Lee, can I just move on to you, because the ECNY at the moment is, of course, focused on the domestic market. You are starting to explore cross-border partnerships at the moment with other central banks, but how does the ECNY fit in with the PBOC and China's goal of internationalizing the yuan? And many commentators have also suggested this is about reducing reliance on the US dollar. Can you provide some comments on that?
Thank you, Arjun. As Governor Zhou has already said, the motivation for ECNY, for now at least, is focusing primarily on domestic use. For the internationalization of renminbi, we have said many times that it's a natural process, and our goal is not to replace US dollar or any other international currency. I think our goal is to allow the market to choose and to facilitate international trade and investment. So in terms of the ECNY, in the international stage, right now we have already joined the CBDC bridge established jointly by BIS, Bank of Thailand, HKMA, and UAE. And as Mr. Carstens just mentioned, we are exploring different options of interoperability. But as also Governor Zhou mentioned, that interoperability is a very complex issue, and we are not in a hurry to reach any particular solution yet. I think right now we are open to different options and experiment with different technologies. And our focus, again, is that we want to establish a very solid domestic ECNY first, and build up a healthy ecosystem. At the same time, working with our international partners, hopefully in the long term we have a cross-border solution as well. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for the insight, Deputy Governor there. Look, we've got about 15 minutes left of this session, so I just like the panelists to try and keep their answers tight so we can get everyone in for this last one. Assistant Governor RMD, can I come to you, because I want to discuss for this last part of the session the role of Bitcoin and other private cryptocurrencies in society and the financial system moving forward alongside the development of CBDCs. So, Assistant Governor, can the likes of Bitcoin or some of these other digital coins or DM, for example, coexist with central bank digital currencies when they eventually become more widespread?
Quite difficult questions. Bitcoin has been here for quite some time, maybe 10 years. But I think the difference between Bitcoins and CBDC, central bank digital currency, is that one thing is a CBDC is a digital form of money that is issued by central bank. It has a role. It has the CBDC has a role of as a money. So it has a unit of account. It has a store of value, and then it has the medium of exchange. And then people trust it because it's issued by central bank or government. So I think it's a little bit different from the Bitcoin. Bitcoin is something that we say that decentralization. So it's quite different. And then the valuation and the store of value that Bitcoin still fail in that. For me, I think that from my personal point of view, I think that Bitcoin can be as asset that people invest in, but not as a medium of exchange or as the currency that central bank issue. So it's a separate thing. That's why lately there are some attempts to issue something that called stablecoin, so that the value of that coin will be more stable. But still, it's how can we trust it? So it's the issue of the trust. So it can have some value on its way, but I think it's a different league of the CBDC. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Carstens, I'd just like to address this question to you. You know, you've said in the past that cryptocurrencies are no challenge to sovereign money. Of course, proponents of those currencies would argue otherwise. But what role does crypto have to play alongside fiat digital currencies, CBDCs? And if so, if it does have a role, what do you think that role is?
Well, as Bashira mentioned, I think that Bitcoin and stable coin, more Bitcoin than or cyber currencies, they have acquired some use as an investment alternative, mostly speculative type of investment. It's a way that some investors have found ways to try to hedge themselves against certain possible states of nature. It's still very early to see if this really will pan out, because Bitcoin is very difficult to establish its fair value, and also the governance on the way it is offered, it has a lot of underlying questions. What is clear is that Bitcoin doesn't fulfill the traditional roles of money. We haven't really seen that currency to take off as a means of payments or a unit of account. It could be a store of value, but it's still too early to see how it will fare. Stable coins have some issues also that make it suboptimal versus central bank money or commercial bank money supported by regulation. But with strong governance, strong regulation, there are different uses that stablecoin can have in some particular cases. I think it would be easier to manage, but still I would claim that this different form of these different manifestations, I would say, of money are still suboptimal. What I would want to see is to have a system where, and I think this is a challenge for central banks, is that CBDC could be used in a very versatile way by different innovators, by different ideas that can come along. I think that we have, through many centuries, we have been working very hard to invent money, sovereign money. And I think we have done it very, very well. As a matter of fact, I think the PBOC has been very, very clear in saying, well, cash works very well. Let's try to imitate it. And I think they have imitated extremely well with the design of ECNY. And I think we can do that. And if we can, on top of that, allow private innovations to run with CBDC, I think it can be a win-win situation where we can take advantage of all the technical innovation that the private sector can bring, either through blockchain or through networks, as the Libra exercise tried to do, and we would have from a monetary point of view a solid system based on CBDC with all the best that technology can bring. So to reach this, I would say, a virtuous arrangement is the real challenge we face, and we want to work towards it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, actually, building upon CBDCs. Javier, can I come to you on this topic as well? You know, many commentators have said, well, the advent of digital currencies could threaten SWIFT's business model. You know, as central banks begin to discuss CBDCs, however, discussing interoperability with each other, I mean, what role does SWIFT then play in the future of this world of digital money?
Yeah, it's a very good question that I've been asked many times as well. I mean, first, I mean, the attention to CBDC is a natural development, in my opinion, of digitalization, and it makes total sense for me for central banks to evaluate future models for the transfer of value and settlement in a fully digitalized way. And important at the same time, think about the overall effects these different models may have of the cohesion of the overall system and the interoperability we were referring to. At the same time, and mentioned that earlier, the digital currencies sit alongside, or will sit alongside, all the forms of fiat money, notes and central bank reserves and commercial bank money. Usually from my perspective, of course, as an infrastructure provider, it is not for me to give an opinion on whether they should or shouldn't be issued, but rather to focus on the infrastructure for that to work if they get introduced. And that innovation has to be done regardless of whether transactions are happening in renminbi, in dollars, in euros, or any sort of digital form of currency. So then to address your point, CBDC as a currency or as an instrument will need to be analyzed in parallel to the mechanisms that exist today for the transfer of digital currencies. And clearly the big attraction, I'll come back to what the points that have been made earlier on with digital currencies, is that they combine the exchange of value and its settlement in one single digital process. But in that sense, one key challenge is the connectivity across borders and across systems, and how this can happen. Because at the end of the day, international payments is the interoperability of domestic infrastructures across each other, and this is exactly why what is needed to make CBDCs a practical proposition. So maybe to say, I think in terms of the interoperability, the key questions that will need to be asked is how to make interoperability between token-based and account-based networks, interoperability between CBDC networks and other value, currencies, securities, networks, and different technologies. And maybe to close, I mean, to address your point about SWIFT, from our perspective, the new digital platform that we're building as the evolution of correspondent banking to make international transactions account to account fully seamless and as efficient as domestic one, so totally interconnected. That digital platform is currency agnostic. Therefore, there will need to be in the face of it for CBDCs an intermediate role. Unless everyone is going to hold every currency, someone will have to do the FX and bridge between jurisdictions. Currently, correspondent banks occupy that role of intermediary along some of the new entrants. So how that evolves with CBDC introductions remains to be seen, but everyone will have to evolve and reposition in a new environment to get that fully interconnected. And that's how I see the role of SWIFT to play, together with the private sector and public authorities, is to make sure that this interoperability and the technology front, with all the right foundations in terms of risk management and cyber security and financial crime compliance that are already embedded in today's ecosystem, be taken to also the new digital way of transferring currency. So that's why I don't see that mutually exclusive. The platform that we're building together, that we've built together, and that is owned at the end of the day by the industry, is the backbone regardless of the currency that will be exchanged.
Thanks, Javier. And Hannah, for you in the US, PayPal has currencies. But how do you see digital currencies, CBDCs as well, playing into this idea of cross-border for you?
Starting from last year, PayPal started to enable or allow the usage of Bitcoin on our platform, just for shopping, not direct currency-based transactions, but just for shopping. Well, why do we do this? According to Governor Zhou and many other panelists, the underlying infrastructure well, let me talk about the underlying infrastructure. We have one account-based infrastructure or architecture, and we also have the token-based distributed architecture. So there are different types of underlying architectures or infrastructures. Well, PayPal features an open platform. We are supportive of over 100 currencies and their transactions. So going forward, we're quite confident that DC is going to be the trend going forward. And we're working with central banks around the world with a lot of communication. In the future, on the horizon, we are seeing an account-based digital currency like the CNY, or there could also be token-based currencies. Well, the token-based system points to a new architecture. With the new architecture, how do we ensure its safety? We've talked about AML and other security features and compliance requirements that must be in place. So that's why token-based system has not yet been tested globally. But last year we were the first to roll out this architecture, so that in this pilot or in this effort we can strengthen our technology. Nowadays, digital payment is account-based. The use case is mature, and technologies are mature. But in the future, with regard to those multiple architectures and systems, how do we achieve interoperability or a linkage together with risk management? That's what we're doing.
Deputy Governor Lee, can I just come to you on this one? A few years ago, the PBOC took a very hard line on cryptocurrency trading, on issuing as well here in China. Some would argue that the industry has matured somewhat since those regulations came into place. Do you expect the PBOC to change its hardline policies on cryptocurrency trading and issuance in China?
Well, we regard Bitcoin and stablecoin as crypto assets. And so crypto assets, as Augustine just discussed, these are investment alternatives. They are not currency per se. And so the main role we see for crypto assets going forward, their main role is investment alternative. And as investment alternative, I think many countries, including China, are still looking into it and thinking about what kind of regulatory requirements, maybe minimal, but we need to have some kind of regulatory requirement to prevent speculative nature, the speculation of such assets, to create any serious financial stability risk. And before we have a clear idea what kind of regulation we need, I think we will keep with our current regulation. That's one point. Another point is that for some stable coins, they are crypto assets. And if they want to serve as widely accepted payment solution, we need stronger regulations. They're stronger than on Bitcoin in the sense that something like probably like a currency board. Because for a privately issued stablecoin to serve as a widely accepted payment solution, it has to have very strong regulation like a bank, quasi-bank, to serve that kind of function. So going forward, any stablecoin which may have the ambition to become a widely accepted payment solution has to be strictly regulated as a bank or quasi-bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor Lee. Mr. Zhou, Governor Zhou, you had a comment to add to that?
Well, let me provide some comments. I agree with all what you have said. We must make a distinction between digital assets and digital currencies. They are different. There are three characteristics with digital currencies, as Augustine has pointed out. But let me add one more. In the case of China, in considering all those issues, we attach extra importance to the function of the financial sector to serve the real economy, whether it involves digital assets or digital currencies. They must be integrated with the real economy while serving the real economy. There are a lot of payments in the real economy. Therefore, payment innovation helps with the real economy. Without those payment solutions, real economy will be stranded. But how about digital assets? What role does digital asset, or what benefits do digital assets bring to the real economy? Well, still, that's a question mark on my mind. So people like me tend to be quite cautious about that. And having gone through global financial crisis back in 2008, we have had several takeaways. So if financial products are detached from the real economy, it might give rise to problems such as shadow banking and some derivatives. Back in 2008, or in run-up to the financial crisis, some derivatives were simply traded for speculation without much linkage with the real economy. So by then, in the case of Citibank and Bank of America and some other financial institutions, their CEOs will say that I don't understand the trades performed by my trading desk of my bank, although I'm the CEO of the bank. That's what happened back then. So we're not conclusive about whether they are good or bad, but we need to be cautious. We need to be prudent. And in China, we have the characteristic, we always emphasize that for whatever financial innovation we have, it must serve the real economy. You must have this justification for the real economy.
Last question, since we're into the topic of financial regulation. I do want to talk about fintech regulation and innovation to Deputy Governor Lee. The PBOC has also seemed to be taking a stricter line on fintech companies being governed like banks. I want to bring up the example of the Ant Group IPO being suspended. Now there's a rectification plan in place. Just wanted to quickly get your thoughts. Once those rectifications are done and the PBOC is satisfied with those, can Ant Group resume its IPO? And did you see this move as necessary to balance innovation and financial stability?
I think that question is not within the jurisdiction of the central bank. But I can tell you that I think at central bank we want to see proper reform and proper regulation on all financial activities, including the financial activities of technology companies. And in terms of its future plans, I think we better leave that to relevant regulators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor Lee, for taking my questions. Well, that was a fantastic discussion. I think we've got a lot of insight into the development at this point of central bank digital currencies. They're moving quickly. There's a lot of work to still do, as our participants were mentioning, around interoperability, around figuring out the technology systems and how they work cross-border as well. And that's where companies like PayPal and Swift come into the occasion as well. I've certainly learned a lot from these very intelligent people. I hope you've all learned a lot this evening as well. I'd just like to give our panelists a round of applause for their wonderful comments. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Okay.
Thank you.